A Different Lens is a documentary series that dissects the issues affecting us, right here, right now, with insights from world-leading academics, researchers, and industry leaders. In tonight's A Different Lens Live, we look at the health of the nation. During the COVID lockdown, we've been more concerned with our health than ever before. But our focus has shifted from Australia's biggest killer, heart disease. Every year, 50,000 Australians will suffer a heart attack, with one person dying every 12 minutes. We spend more money on cardiovascular disease than any other health issue. And this is despite all the advances that have been made over the last 3 decades. The new Victorian Heart Institute aims to change that. The first of its kind in Australia, it will bring world-leading heart researchers, health providers, and the community together with patients to create a network that will improve the future of heart health across the globe. A collaboration between Monash University, Monash Health, and the Victorian State Government, the new specialist hospital will open in 2022, spearheaded by world-renowned cardiologist, Professor Stephen Nichols.
Despite all of the advances that we've made in the way that we treat heart disease continues to be the leading health problem in this country. The Victorian Heart Hospital is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for this university, and it's going to embed teaching and research inside the building. So it's an opportunity because it will bring the researchers to where the patients are.
Welcome everybody. It's fabulous to have so many people here tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners and the elders past, present and emerging of the land, the waters on which Monash University is located, and to the traditional owners and elders of the lands and waters wherever you or I are this evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Sally Coburn. I'm going to be your facilitator for this evening. I'm a proud Monash medical graduate who also works in radio and TV. Now, as I said, I'm going to be your facilitator. I'm also going to be your fascinator. It is Oaks Day, so hello, we've got the hat on. And it's going to be an absolutely fascinating discussion tonight. I'm very excited because what we're doing is a part of a whole series of discussions of Monash University's different lens. So we've got a lot of experts that will come on and talk about different issues that are appropriate for things that you are interested in. And tonight, it's matters of the heart. Now, that's not the Dr. Feelgood type of matters of the heart. We're talking about heart health. And so please stay with us. It's going to be great because we're going to be talking all about incredible journeys that we're all going to go on in the future. As you heard, we've all been totally immersed in COVID, and we've got the biggest killer in Australia that we really need to tackle, and that's heart disease. So if we can put the same effort into managing heart disease, hello, it's going to be a different world. So as I said, heart disease is Australia's #1 killer, but this week also marks the beginning of a bright new hope on the horizon. What I'm talking about is the Victorian Heart Institute. It's Monash University's new home for heart research that brings together the greatest minds across research, teaching, and the clinical community to imagine the future to address our biggest killer, heart disease. Earlier this week, the Institute brought together hundreds of these fabulous minds, and they talked solutions, and they talked together in the same webinar. And that's what's been wonderful coming out of COVID, hasn't it? That we can talk together. And what they came up with, it was called the Cardio Symposium. And we're very much pleased to have 4 of those fabulous minds here tonight as panel members when we talk about what's going on in the new institute. So joining us tonight is Professor Stephen Nichols. Now, Stephen is a cardiologist. He's also the inaugural director of the Victorian Heart Institute, and he's also the clinical director of the Victorian Heart Hospital. Professor Professor Peter Curry, Peter, is a research scientist and director of research at the Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute. When I went through university, there was no such thing as a Regenerative Medicine Institute. Professor Sophia Zungas. Sophia is the head of the School of the Public Health and Preventive Medicine at Monash University. She's Professor of Diabetes and Vascular Health and Ageing. A lot of cardiac stuff going on with those diseases. And Dr. Emily Koche. She is a cardiologist and an electrophysiologist. And we'll find out more about what an electrophysiologist is. And she's at Monash Health. So maybe we'll get on to talking to you first about the Institute and why we actually need an institute like this. So, Stephen, heart disease, as we've said twice now, is one of the biggest killer, or is the biggest killer in Australia. It's taken far more lives than something like COVID, yet in terms of innovation in care, things may have stalled. So this newly created Victorian Heart Institute will bring together fabulous experts, but it's got a little bit of an edge. It's not your normal research institute. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about why do we need this institute?
Well, thanks, Sally. I think the Institute gives us a great opportunity to take advantage of the fact that we're building a heart hospital. And we're not only building a dedicated heart hospital, the only one of its type in the country, but we're placing it on a university campus. And that combination was really exciting to me because it meant that we were able to do a lot of things for a lot of patients, both inside the building and hopefully out in the community. But by placing it on the university campus, we could make all those new connections across the entire university, all its faculties, all of its campuses. And Monash has many campuses across a number of countries, and how we could kind of develop all of those collaborations to basically make research and teaching much more innovative than we've done before.
Now, people who are attending the webinar tonight, we've got a lot of varied people, I'm sure. We've probably got a lot of scientists, a lot of clinicians, we've got a lot of general public, people who have lived experience like my good self. And I suppose from that perspective, maybe they don't understand why this is so exciting, because can we use the word silos?
We can. And I think that for us, what's exciting is that if we're going to build a hospital, we're going to place it on a university campus. How do we then develop new ways of research, new ways of teaching the next generation of healthcare professionals? How do we integrate those activities actually inside the hospital itself? And so I think that, we're kind of putting that task to our team to see how do we kind of integrate those programs to a better degree. But then how do we then connect the hospital outside the building across the whole university with that idea of trying to break down the silos, because we think it's those multidisciplinary collaborations between people from a vast range of different backgrounds that will really lead to the cutting edge new approaches to not only new techniques to diagnose and treat the disease, but actually better ways to deliver the things that we already do but we don't necessarily do as well as we would like.
And with all of this collaboration, is there also not just treatment, but also prevention?
Absolutely. So prevention has the potential to be the single most important thing that can impact the heart outcome of this country. National Heart Foundation, for example, plays a major role in promoting that. I'm a preventive cardiologist, so it's what I do when I see patients in my clinic. And we know that prevention starts early in life, and it also continues even after a person's heart disease has already become clinically apparent, because we want to prevent those people from having bad outcomes and ending up in hospital and needing expensive therapy. So it goes from prevention all the way through to cutting edge diagnosis and treatment. And then ultimately, then how do we do all of that, not only at a community level, but then try and target the right one of those approaches to individuals so that the right patient gets the right treatment.
Now, you mentioned the role of the National Heart Foundation, and obviously, therefore, when people think collaboration, they think, oh, the cardiologist might talk to the endocrinologist and the electrophysiologist. But you're talking about a really broad sort of group of people, and including the general public?
Absolutely. So when we designed our governance structure for the Institute, we had a number of important committees, and it was important for us to have two really important consumer groups. One was essentially patients and the members of the community, but the other one was actually clinicians. And it was important for us on both ends to do that, because it doesn't make any sense for us to develop new research or teaching techniques if it's not actually going to work for the people that we need to do it with. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is that patients and clinicians actually are really good at knowing what we do well and what we don't do well and what the unmet need is. And so their kind of buy-in to helping us develop the new strategic directions for the Institute are really critical. And so those groups have been really important for us to kind of integrate into the Institute.
You're also you're the head of the Institute, but you're also the head of the Heart Hospital, which I understand will be opening in 2022. I was involved right when it was just a speck in some people's eyes, and it's just amazing to see where this has gone to. Where is this institute and this hospital actually going to be physically?
So it's down on some of the old sporting fields at the Monash Uni campus at Clayton, on the corner of Wellington and Blackburn Roads. We have a fully designed building. Thankfully, we've started construction. We've just recently poured the 4th floor of concrete for the elevator shaft. We are well into the sky. People who drive past the university can't believe how quickly it's going up. Thankfully, COVID has not slowed us down, and we are well on our way to a building that will hopefully be complete about 2 years from now.
And the Institute will be inside that hospital?
So the Institute is quite unique in that it will have a physical home in the hospital. It's got its own floor where we've got teaching facilities, simulation labs. It's got standard research labs for people like Pete Curry and colleagues. It's got a clinical trial research area. But importantly, it's got a fairly major virtual component in that most of our members are going to exist somewhere else in the university, whether it's in regenerative medicine with Pete Curry, whether it's in the arts faculty, whether it's in the design and architecture faculty. And that really gives you a sense for the kind of reach that we're trying to go for here. We're really trying to kind of push the boundaries here to try and bring in a really broad range of people to help us kind of come up with some really innovative kind of ideas.
This whole innovation thing, it sounds, could I go so far? I love saying Victoria is the best place in the whole world, but, you know, could we also maybe be seeing something on a global scale?
Well, that's entirely why we're here. We know that Monash University already has a global reputation from a cardiovascular perspective. There's a reason why we're building a heart hospital in Victoria, because of the biomedical powerhouse that the state is. We are building this entire project, hospital and institute, to be a global player. We've been lucky that our scientific advisory board are the best of the best from overseas. And we've said that that's what we want to develop, and they're helping us do that.
So what are the biggest challenges with regard to, if you could list the top 3 things that we change the world, what would you say they are?
I think we still, on a community level, don't get it right in terms of prevention. So there's a huge amount of work there. We still have patients where we treat them with the best treatments possible, and they still have bad outcomes. We have patients where perhaps we need to work out how we personalise treatment. And then the final one, if you'd let me use a 4th, because it's a really important one, is we know that there are members of the community who have really bad outcomes from heart disease, but bad access to the therapies that we currently have, what we call underserved populations. And that's a really important group for us to be kind of looking to see how we can improve the heart outcomes for those groups.
So before we sort of move on to the notion of innovation and talk more with people, the other people on the panel, can I just ask you, some people would say, well, why do we need a hospital just for heart, and why do we need an institute just for heart, and why aren't you just inside one of the other hospitals?
Well, we think it's an opportunity to take advantage of the fact that there's a huge clinical need. We have the ability to develop centres of excellence and to consolidate that. So not only are we dealing with a large volume of patients, and unfortunately the reality is that people like Emily and myself are not going to be out of a job in the near future. But how do we then deliver those models of care in a way that it's highly specialised, and how do we develop sophisticated kind of centres of excellence? And we think the Heart Hospital enables that. The Institute really takes advantage of that opportunity that the hospital provides. And that was a major factor that attracted me to coming to Victoria in the first place to take up this role, was the university's role here, buy-in here, wasn't just a bit of land and a bit of money. It was that they wanted to be a significant player in all of this. And when they said, look, we want you to go away and just, can you come up with something that's about research and teaching, and hopefully play everybody in. And we came back with the institute model. The support from the Vice Chancellor and the rest of the university has been extraordinary in terms of how we can bring that to fruition.
And from my perspective as a very keen educator, having the ability to be on campus with medical students, we've got the whole gamut, and I think that's where we want to move to next. I'd like to really move on to talk about collaboration.
Collaboration drives innovation, and the Victorian Heart Institute will bring academics, research students, PhDs, scientists, and clinicians together like never before. This cohort of bright minds will find its home within the living laboratory at the Victorian Heart Hospital, similar to how the world's leading tech companies operate. The Institute will accelerate cardiovascular health innovations. It also provides a platform to interact with other institutes and hospitals around the world for meetings, teaching, and viewing procedures in real time. It's a first for Australia. The question is, how will it work? And how will the community benefit?
Well, collaboration, this is the thing. We all know what collaboration is. It's what we all did to get down to double donut day with COVID. But what does collaboration mean in terms of research and in the context of heart disease and how we get it? As I said earlier, you can get a whole lot of doctors in a room and do it, but maybe it's a lot more than that. So joining us now is Professor Sophia Zungas, and Professor Zungas is a clinician and a scientist, and she knows all about populations. Sophia, welcome. And can you tell me what advantages are there in taking this sort of collaborative model?
Thank you, Sally. I think it's really great to be able to bring, as you've indicated earlier, the best of minds together, different skill sets, individuals from different disciplines, whether it's medicine, science, arts, design, bring them together in the one place and get them together talking a different language from what they're used to talking, and actually being elevating their thinking so that it's much more outside the box, blue sky and innovative. And when we do that, we develop the future workforce that understand and are able to work in this space collaboratively. But also we design a new language, and we train the next innovators of the future, but also get them thinking around what those new questions might be, and also the translators of the future.
It seems such a no-brainer, this whole collaboration thing. Why is it so hard? And has it just traditionally not been the way that we've all been off doing our own thing? What's the difficulty?
Well, I think partly we've all learned our own specific skills. I'm an endocrinologist. I'm used to interacting with other endocrinologists. I'm used to doing my research with them. And now I'm actually interacting with cardiologists, nephrologists, electrophysiologists, the regenerative medicine scientists. And we're all we're attacking really complex, wicked problems. And these don't have easy solutions, so they won't necessarily be within our silo. So we need to be thinking about different mechanisms and different solutions. And we can only do that if we come together. And as part of that journey, we're also collaborating, as Steve mentioned earlier, the consumer, the individual, the person in the community. And they're coming in and co-designing these solutions and these programs with us, so that we're collaborating with the community more broadly.
So speaking of collaboration, why don't we bring the rest of the group in? Because I wanted to point at Peter Curry and ask you, Peter. Look, we're hearing firsthand. We're seeing this bench to bedside thing with COVID, and everyone's trying to find a vaccine. It's really, I think, shown people the importance of trials. Do you want to sort of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So indeed, I think we all work collaboratively in science and medicine, and we've seen exemplars of that in the COVID situation. And you mentioned the emergency that has produced, but cardiovascular disease is an ongoing emergency that we live with. So what I'm really excited about this project is that it's going to be a beacon of light in clinical care of excellence that my cohort of basic scientists can work with, so we can begin to deliver the amazing discoveries they're making into the clinic and do the clinical trials, which are inbuilt into the structure of the hospital. So we'll be living cheek by jowl with clinicians that have a lived experience of what our population requires to be delivered medically, and they'll be hearing about what we're doing in the lab and how the two things can relate to one another. And sometimes it's as simple as, we have this problem, we do this experiment, that seems to solve the problem. And it might be something that's never occurred before, but having that clinical excellence, living next to science excellence, always delivers something innovative.
I've seen it before, where you might be sitting in the cafeteria at an institution or something, and you overhear someone at the next table talking about, oh, we've got a problem with this or this. Is this part of being in this collaborative thing? And I bring everybody in on this. Is this the way you expect to see it, this corridor conversations about, oh, Emily, great to see you. Can you help me with my electrophysiology problem with my muscle that I'm developing on the bench in the embryo? Is this something you're all excited about?
I'll pipe in here. So it goes back to when you mentioned the silos, because we do all work in our little specialty areas. And like Sophia said, if you're together swapping ideas, the ideas grow. And so the individuals all get together and we're greater as a large group. And Peter says you have these ideas and do the positive feedback and change the experiment as it's going along into clinical practice, you get a better result more quickly.
Sophia, can I bring you back in here? Because one of the things that I've learned just recently, and it was a friend of mine who really did a lot of work on this in breast cancer, Zoe Weiner, that what's gone on with the research into heart disease on a population level, it's mainly been about men. And suddenly we've realised we need to look at women because they can be different physiologically.
It's a really good point that you make there, Sally. We've really forgotten that heart disease is actually the #1 killer in women as well. And we've traditionally thought of heart disease as a problem of middle-aged men. And in fact, they were mostly studied in the clinical trials and the population studies of the 70s and 80s and the 90s, if you like. But more recently, with ageing of the population, we clearly understand, and longevity being greater in women, that we've got emerging and evolving differences in the trajectory, in the symptoms, in the way heart disease is diagnosed in women. And also we have women experiencing problems of heart disease in pregnancy, as well as in later life. So I think we need to start measuring these things better. We need to start raising awareness around heart disease in women and understanding what the differences are in terms of risk factors, symptoms, and then, as Steve mentioned earlier, try to understand whether we can individualise treatment better for the females that are experiencing the condition.
Sally, this has implications across the board. Women are less likely to seek medical attention if they get chest pain. When they present to the emergency department, we are less likely to do the same investigations on a woman that we are on a man. When we diagnose their heart disease, we're less likely to treat them with the therapies that we know work. And then when we do clinical trials, we're lucky if 20% of the patients in our trials are women. So, and then we kind of say there's a lack of evidence, and that's why we kind of justify doing all the things that we didn't do. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot of work to do here, just simply to do, I think, a more equitable job. One of the things that we are trying to do is to try to introduce more equity into our clinical trials. So Sophia and I are about to launch a new clinical trial next year, and we've mandated that 50% of the participants have to be women. And we think it's going to be proactive steps like that are going to be required for us to really move that forward.
But it's not just women, it can be cultural groups. I remember when they realised that we had the wrong calibration for bone density, for example, that Asian women, we needed a different group. So this collaboration will mean that we'll get a lot of different stuff happening there too.
It absolutely will, and keeping in mind that the Monash landscape extends beyond our shores to campuses in Malaysia, Indonesia, footprints elsewhere. So we're going to have the opportunity to do that with communities within Australia, but also communities outside.
The unique opportunity for the women, like you say, you're talking about clinical access, but then Upstream is the tissue, the genetics, the what is the actual difference. It's an opportunity for us to do that all on one campus and solve these problems.
Mm. Actually, that's a very good segue into innovation, I think. So maybe we'll move on and talk a bit about innovation amongst the whole group, and especially with you, Emily. So we'll have a look at this.
Heart disease is Australia's biggest killer. What we need more than ever is innovation.
We've had a number of new therapies, whether it be devices or medications, which have really changed the outcome for many patients with heart disease. But despite all of that, we're still faced with the fact that it's a leading cause of death. And so it tells us that as good as the changes that we've made have been, we need new therapies and new approaches to reduce the risk of heart disease even further.
From gene therapy and stem cell research to the miniaturisation of digital technology and remote patient monitoring, the Victorian Heart Institute will be a lightning rod for new ideas, new applications, and a new future for heart health. So, where does innovation start? And what are its limits?
Now, one of the key people who'll be leading on the innovation side of things, of course, is Dr. Emily Koche, and Emily has already spoken up on that issue. Now, you're an electrophysiologist, which, again, when I was a medical student, didn't exist. But, of course, I needed you last week when I believe in doing prep. I ended up in a hospital with rapid atrial fibrillation, and I'm not alone on that. It's a very common condition. So, Emily, where are we going with our bits and pieces of innovation?
Just so that the general public knows, so the electrophysiologist is the electrician of the heart attacks the plumbing. So it's an area that's got a lot of innovation because we work a lot with devices, wearable technology like your irregular heartbeat that you picked up as atrial fibrillation. So there's a lot of development in this area with things we already have, but also where technology is taking us. So like pacemaker devices, whilst they pace the heart, they're actually collecting data and giving a lot of information about the patient's condition. And we can use that in a positive way for prevention or treating before symptoms and getting patients involved in their own care. The other innovation with that is the remote technology. So this leads into sort of the virtual hospital university connection we'll have. Patients can have remote monitoring at home of their data. They can connect with us with various technologies, and we could end up having a virtual hospital, be it inpatient or outpatient. We can manage these conditions.
Mm. We actually have a question that was submitted earlier that I'd like to put to you, if I may, and that is that Nell has asked, what about congenital, and where is it? There we are. Would love to hear you talk about neonatal and paediatric tachycardia, fast heartbeat, and the likelihood of it coming back later in life, and how we might find some way of following that up.
Yeah, it's a good question. So any condition in paediatrics or children's always worrying, and we have Monash Children's Hospital we work with closely, and we'll follow up these type of conditions into adulthood, which obviously the heart hospital leads right into. In terms of research in this area, we collect more detailed information on genetics and substrate and reasons that people have this. For patients to monitor themselves, they've got wearables and we can help them learn about their own heart for the longer term, as well as the current clinical management.
So on the wearables, I think that on the tip of everyone's tongue is, will I go and get an iPhone 12 because will I be able to do an ECG and an O2 monitor and all that sort of stuff? I don't know whether, Stephen, that's more in your area, but some of this stuff is ahead of itself, I think.
No, it's not just ahead of itself. It's actually where we should be. I mean, this is where Apple's really clever. This is what people want. So they've made a product people want. Now we have to use it to make it a good way for them to manage themselves. And so we take that on board and move technology forward and in a positive way.
But the trouble is we've got very stringent regulation in this country, and obviously a device like that, if it was going to be used in a medical sense, wouldn't it have to get TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration approval, Stephen?
Yeah, so...
sorry.
You go.
I'll keep going. I'll keep rabbiting on. The regulations about medical devices, like you say, but there's this overlap. I mean, this is an iPhone or an Apple Watch is available to anyone, and I think... regulation takes too long often, and it's for a good reason. We have to be careful in what's regulated, but we need technology to move along quite quickly so we keep up to date with these things. Patients are going to be ahead of us, and I think that's where we're in the Institute. We're going to have access to this digital technology, these platforms where we can have this data and move along in a way that's still quite within regulations.
I suppose, and I can speak from first-hand experience here. I last week when I had my irregular heart rhythm, I put my finger on my little phone thingy, and I looked at my rhythm, and rather than being nice smoothie bits, it was but you couldn't use that as a diagnostic tool. I still felt, even being a doctor, I'm still going to hospital to get this.
However, the first thing you did was do that rather than call an ambulance. So it says this is what you do. You Google it, you check it, you do it yourself. Why not? It does help, and I think we have to embrace that and use it positively.
But as a GP, I would say I'd be worried about the people who would do that and go, oh, I'm fine, I won't call an ambulance. That's my, and I think probably, Sophia, that's where epidemiology is going to come in so that we can really check these things.
Absolutely. And that's where we can put them out there, implement them at a population level and really understand what they mean and whether they're sensitive, specific, are they picking up the conditions we think they're picking up, when do they trigger and need for that individual to present to hospital emergency. So that's the sort of stuff that we can understand and by applying at a population level, and then take it back to the clinic where Emily's working, and she can, individualize it and augment and facilitate that technology so it's used in its best way.
So Sally, this is one of the really important points of all the technological advances, whether it's a device, whether it's kind of a new imaging technique. We can see lots of things now that we couldn't see with the resolution that we can today years before. The question's not how good are they, it's how are we going to use that, how's it going to change what doctors or what people in the community or patients do, and then how's that going to change their outcomes. And that's why it's really critical for us to get these technologies moving into the clinical and research setting, into the hands of people like Sophia and Emily, and then we then ask those next questions. So yeah, the current iteration of the watch may not be perfect. It's pretty good, but it will lead to an even better version moving forward by putting it in the hands of people like on the screen.
And some of the sort of innovations that I think a lot of people who are watching this webinar may not even be aware is where we've gone from surgical procedures trying to deal with heart valve issues, and now we're doing them with little keyholes.
Yes, exactly. And that's the innovation that will develop and grow with our relationships with different medical companies that we already have within Monash Heart, and that goes into the Heart Hospital. Potentially these innovations and developments will happen in the Heart Institute. So the companies will be interested, having the people on the ground, the engineers there, the designers, they can be in and out of the lab, see how we use these miniaturized valves, leadless pacemakers, and then make the next generation and changes all within weeks and months rather than years.
And that does speak to a broader play for what this whole project's really about, Sally, which is that there's the patient care side, but what we're really creating here is a precinct. We're going to create a precinct that has great heart care, it has research teaching, but then we'll have industry. Industry will move into that neck of the woods, will spin out commercialization opportunities from the discoveries and the technologies that we develop. And so that's also something that's very important both to the university and to the state government.
I suppose some people may say, but if you're a heart hospital, what happens if something goes wrong with my diabetes, for example? But I imagine you collaborate.
We do.
We do. I don't think there will be a problem. As an endocrinologist, I'm not concerned. And as we've learnt through COVID, we have telehealth, we have, Zoom, we're interacting all the time. So I think the hospital will allow, for example, myself to work within a dedicated heart hospital, and bring my expertise to cardiology and share, but also allow me to work in my own, academic institution and be able to provide that consultative service remotely. And I think this is really important also, and we haven't brought this to bear is the role that we might play for regional and remote Australia, where we now are so familiar with interacting through these other mechanisms that we can even take that expertise to those underserved populations that may not have access directly.
Mm. Look, it's extremely exciting, and I suppose we do have an example in Victoria of a very successful collaborative unit in the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. I suppose, is this like they are to cancer, you are to heart?
I think there's absolutely some synergies, and there's some learnings from them that are really important for what we're trying to do. So it's really that idea of how do we not only do lots of things, but do them in different ways, which are ultimately better for patients, and how do we build teams? This isn't just about doctors, it's about training and skilling up our nurses and other allied health workers. You know, Emily, for example, her heart rhythm clinic has a really wonderful nurse practitioner that runs her own clinics, runs her own research. And you know, these are the innovative kind of ways of delivering healthcare moving forward. How do we do it great, and how do we do it in a kind of cost-effective way?
And question without notice, will you be skilling up us GPs?
We absolutely, because we think that you know, in addition to research, education and training is really critical. And for us, there's some needs to train some people that we need to work in our building, but we think there are educational opportunities that are well beyond there. So it's not only working with GPs, but it's working with cardiology kind of courses both online and face-to-face for a range of other kind of healthcare professional groups.
I suppose there's probably an elephant in the room that everyone's hearing about this wonderful hospital and institution, and it's going to do all these fabulous things. But is it going to be a public hospital?
It is. It's a public hospital. It's actually part of Monash Health. So that means that we are the cardiac service for Monash Health. You talked about collaboration, and you know, one of the things that we need to collaborate with all of those other departments within Monash, most of which will be at least 2 kilometres down the road, if not at other campuses at Monash. And so one of the things, and again, keeping back to the innovation kind of theme, we are sitting down with each of those departments and saying, okay, well, how's this relationship going to work when we move down 2 kilometres down the road? Mm-hmm. How do we do the meat and potatoes collaboration with that distance, but how do we find new innovative ways of collaborating, whether it's telehealth, whether it's forming new kind of collaborative services? That, you know, so that conversation's going on today.
So, Peter, you work with muscles and little tiny molecules, and you do surgery on molecules. Tell us, what is the future?
Well, the future's there in the collaboration. So the future is the synthesis between the two worlds that we have. So we want to try and bring our skills and expertise to the world's biggest killer in the Western world. So that's really our goal. So we're a regenerative medicine institute. We're the kind of the last stop on the bus. So if Sophia and Emily and Steve have done their best and you paid no attention to the copious warnings and activities that they've done, and you end up with a damaged heart and your myocardium doesn't repair itself, we are the sort of hell in the handbasket approach, where we're the last stop. So we want to try and repair whatever damage that's happened to whatever organ we can.
So how far away from that actually happening, like you popping in some cells into the heart and it patches up the problem, is that on the cards?
Those treatments are already in clinical trials for some of them. Some work, some don't work. How they work is a mystery too for some of them. There's two basic approaches, is to try and we have this amazing technology now where we can take a skin cell in your body and turn it into any other cell you like, just with some jiggery-pokery. And for the heart, we can make cardiomyocytes in the dish. And the hope one day is that they could be used as a tool or an effective treatment for treating infarcted hearts. And the other approach we're really interested in is we have a regenerative capacity. When we're young and we're first born, our heart has a great regenerative capacity, but we lose it. And we also know that there are many animals whose heart regenerates perfectly fine, thank you very much, and they look very similar to our own. So what it is about those circumstances that allows regeneration but yet in an adult heart, that does not occur. So there's a lot of advances in that area about molecules and treatments that are pro-regenerative for tissues.
Now, I suppose people are probably thinking, oh, you're collaborating, you're innovating. So, you know, down the road there and down the corridor, you're working on these little Petri dishes, and down the road there is someone having a heart attack. It's not as if you're going to grab the Petri dish and throw it at the patient down the end of the corridor. There's a lot more to it than that, I imagine, Peter.
Yes, of course. And, you know, there's a longitudinal process to get from an idea and a discovery into the clinic. But it sure as hell is shortened if your clinician is sitting across the coffee machine from you. And actually, sometimes it can be simple and can be the things that are clinical imperative are not really known to us scientists very well. And just having a discussion, my own father was a clinician, and sometimes I never really realized the things that really impacted people's life majorly are often not as complex as you would think. So I do think the marriage of the two worlds is important. But yes, it's not like that. You don't have a discovery in the morning and walk over to the clinic in the afternoon and stick it in a patient. But the infrastructure Steve talked about, the clinical trials facilities that he has, his engagement with industry partners, these are all stepping stones to true impactful clinical treatments for everyday Australians, I think.
So let's all get together now and have a chat as a group, because I think, Emily, with regard to this, you're at the treating end, Stephen, you're at the treating end, and Sophia, you're at the, in one of your hats on, you're at the population level. But I suppose we're not just talking about treating damage, we're talking about trying to prevent the damage in the first place, but we need to understand the physiology. And I suppose there is another question from Kate. Kate actually asks about genetic testing, and I suppose that's probably your end, Peter, looking at the genes, and can we pick people who've got issues with their heart and maybe do something about it? Any thoughts on that, panel?
Yeah, so we have a collaboration. One of our researchers works with one of the Monash heart researchers, and there's an artery dissection disease that had no known genetic basis before. And working with one of the Monash heart people, we were able to identify the gene that was responsible for that clinical process. And it was a glue that holds together the tissues of the artery. And it now gives us a clinical lead on how we could design treatments around it. So again, once the patient and the scientists get in the same room, and we can now, with these modern genetic technologies, rapidly get to the genetic causes of disease, then treatments can be designed on the basis of that information.
So Stephen or Emily, maybe I'll come to you on this one with regard to something like what Peter just said. I always get a bit sort of confused, I think, when people talk about, we can recognise the gene, but it's not as if we can snip the gene out of every cell. Are we looking at pre-implantation genetics in IVF, for example, which is another Monash innovation? Are we talking about that's the sort of thing we'll be offering people, or what do you see for the future?
I think that's what we're currently offering. We have pre-genetic testing. We have genetics available for cardiac genetics at Monash Health at the moment. So I think you're looking forward to how do we use this in a more innovative way, and whether everyone has that done or you do it for specific diseases. Peter's already said one little area clinicians come up to him with, and they've looked in, they've found a gene and they're heading towards a solution. So there's endless ways we can use that to look at the current clinical issues, and I suppose extend into the university where you've got all these scientists that can take the genetics is just exploding. I mean, it's computer technology, so as it's computing, it gets rapid.
But Sally, I just want to add the thing you said about correcting, we're not going to snip it out. That's actually happening now. Mm-hmm. So the CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which everybody has been talking about, which lets you go in and change and alter DNA, has been developed for a range of genetic conditions. I work in the muscular dystrophy field, which has a large cardiac component, and there are companies and clinical trials that are underway with these technologies in the US at the moment. And these are the kind of technologies that we'd love to transfer directly into the heart hospital setting. And I think there's an absolute tsunami of treatments of that type once the first ones are developed. So yes, we can go and genetically correct tissues now. It's a proven technology.
People get access to it through this Heart Institute.
Well, exactly. I think the other thing to think about with genetics is that looks at genetics looking at single gene and single gene defects. And we know that now with genetic testing, we can find thousands of genes, all with very minor abnormalities and changes in them, which associate with a higher risk of heart disease. And how do you pick which of them is important? And now what we can do is we can calculate genetic scores. So we can find all of those changes across a patient's genetic sample, calculate a score. And that's what we're starting to look at, the use of those scores in the clinic, because as genetic testing becomes cheaper and it becomes a lot more high throughput, and you don't have to wait 6-8 weeks to get a result, more and more people are going to have access to information, and so if we're going to have access to information, it's important for us to know how do we use it effectively.
So I just want to hark right back to the beginning when we were talking about being at a university like Monash, being collaborators, and we've talked about, you know, the medical side of it, but I had the absolute privilege of interviewing Don Ingber, who is a bioengineer from America, who talks about nanobots being injected into your body to deliver treatments. I mean, are you getting together with the mechanical engineering department over and talking in the Hargrave and stuff like that? Is that going to happen?
Not only that, we actually have engineering labs built in the heart hospital on that institute floor. So we don't want to walk across the university to find the engineers. We want them in the building with us.
Wow. It's terribly exciting. And are there any other things that you wanted to get across tonight that we haven't got across so far? Any thoughts that are burning? Anything that the people who are watching this now can do?
Well, number one, I think we should remember about prevention and living well, which is the final message. So obviously the top risk factors for heart disease and our biggest killer are, high blood pressure, being overweight, diabetes. So being more mindful of that sort of thing, exercising, looking after yourself are certainly simple things to do, and then seeking medical attention if you've got any symptoms like you had, which is always a good idea.
And Stephen, last word from you, maybe, because you're head of the institute and of the heart hospital. Where do you expect us to be, maybe in 10 years, if we come back to do our Lens Live webinar in 10 years' time?
Well, I think for us, and it goes back to the silo thing, what we want to be able to tell is a story, and we tell the story of what happened across the university. But hopefully, by us doing the things we're hoping to do, that we've brought an eclectic group of people together that would have come up with an idea that they wouldn't have come up with if they hadn't sat around the table together. And we think that's how you design the big projects. They're the projects that get funded, and they're the projects that ultimately change what we do for people and the outcomes in terms of their health.
And I presume the Victorian government's obviously had some input into this through Monash, or just to the institute, or where's that come up?
Well, I think the Victorian government support of the Heart Hospital in the first place was critical to all of this, and the fact that for them to come together in that partnership with the university and Monash Health to do a really unique thing. And so the government's support, and as I said, the government's clearly supportive of this idea of being able to grow the kind of the industry connections kind of in the region as well. And because it's not only about improving health, it's improving the knowledge economy, but ultimately it also has major economic benefits for the state.
Absolutely. Well, for the country, for the world. If we can reduce the burden of heart disease, I'm sure that Josh Frydenberg would be very happy. There'd be savings all around. Sophia, you got any final point you wanted to make?
Oh, I think that what's really interesting here is that the lens that it brings to the community and that involvement of the community, and particularly those underserved populations, and hearing those stories and capturing those stories in what we do, and those stories driving the research that we do, which is incredibly important. So we don't want to be just answering academic questions. We want to be addressing clear clinical need, and it's really important, and this institute and hospital will allow us to do that in an integrated way. So thanks for your question, Sally.
And Peter, I suppose the reason I'd like to come to you now is simply because you're the backroom boys, and I often get surprised that a lot of people go, oh my God, my surgeon saved my life, or my doctor gave me my medication. But I think, hang on, it was the scientists who developed this treatment. So would you like to sing the song of the scientists for us?
Oh, look, we're all just lab rats and we love it. We love following our own intellect to try and make discoveries. And what's even more exciting and super exciting about this project is we get to share those discoveries with people who can implement them in the real world. And we really are, every time the floor goes up on that building, as I go past it and I check on it, I get more and more excited about what's going to happen in the future. So we're super happy for the guys up front saving lives, and we're really happy to be in the hospital making discoveries that we hope contribute to that.
And I have to say congratulations to all of you, and congratulations to Monash, because this doesn't just happen overnight. This is 10 years, would I say, Stephen, in the making, easily. And we're going to see it in a couple of years. We'll have that hospital open. We'll have the institute up and running. And hopefully with these days, with innovations, we might have something in 5 years. We might have a new treatment. Emily, would you like that?
Oh, I would love that. I can see massive potential, like Steve sort of said, by having the institute there. The technology is just going to escalate, and we're going to be able to roll it out to all these people. It's going to be great.
So if you're driving down Wellington Road or Blackburn Road, have a little look at the growing building. And if you drive that way to work, it'll be fantastic to see. Don't ask your GP for a referral to this heart hospital. They can go. Monash has a heart. You're head of cardiology at Monash, Steve. So people can go to Monash for their heart problems now. Monash Heart exists, but the new hospital will be a couple of years away. Maybe I'll be your first patient. You never know.
Welcome.
Can I just say it's been an absolute delight speaking to all of you. You are very inspiring, and I'm sure everyone who's listened to you tonight will be absolutely thrilled to think that this is happening in our little hometown of Melbourne and a fabulous University of Monash. I wanted to say thank you to Monash, and thank you to everyone who organised tonight. And I must say that it's been wonderful. So I'll thank you individually. May I thank you, Stephen Nichols, Emily Cotchett, Sophia Zungas and Peter Curry. And can I thank you for watching and being interested, and please keep an eye out for more. And there's going to be more discussions called the Different Lens series. You can go to lens.monash.edu if you want to find out more about it. And I hope we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.